I just want to start with a big thank you to the GEM board for the invitation to be part of this conference. It's really a joy and a privilege to have been with you the last few days, and then to be with the amazing women who are joining me right now. I just want to say GEM has done such a wonderful job of being flexible, which we know is a key skill for mission, and gathering us online for the last 2 years. I know that everyone who's here shares my gratitude for this opportunity to be together. And as I've looked around the screen, I have seen so many people that I look forward to hugging when we can safely gather together again in person, or just waving or elbow bumping if that's your preference. But it will be lovely to be together in person again. And I'm especially delighted to be with Glenda and Melanie and Sophie, who are all amazing and deeply faithful women whose passion for God and being part of what God is doing in the world inspires me and has deepened my own understanding of God's mission. Maurice gave you a little hint of their introductions, and they'll talk about themselves in a little more detail later. But I'm really glad that they all said yes to this invitation. And just lastly, before we jump into our group conversation, I'd like to offer a couple framing thoughts that come from how we work with people discerning a call to mission and work with people when we're training them to get ready for their placements. And we always tell people that we are always part of God's mission, whether we serve halfway around the world or halfway down the block. And every encounter that we have is an opportunity to meet God in a new and transformative way. And in a move that kind of surprises some people, we tell our new missionaries at orientation that the most powerful thing they will do is to be fully present and build relationships that reflect the love of God. And everyone who's engaged in mission knows that there's also a lot of work that comes with this ministry, and that can look very different depending on where God has called you. But at its core is an incarnational ministry of love and relationship. It is being with, not doing for. And in this sense, mission is mutually transformative because being with gives us opportunities to listen, learn, and share with all of the vulnerability and courage that those actions require. And as we continue to live in our baptismal covenant promises of seeking and serving Christ in all persons, loving our neighbors as ourselves, striving for justice and peace among all people, and respecting the dignity of every human being, we are constantly reminded that God's story is always deeper, broader, and more truly inclusive than we can ask or imagine. And we've heard over the last few days stories and quotes and the worship and the wisdom that have been shared with us. And they've given us all a deeply nuanced vision and understanding of mission. And I have absolutely no doubt that you will hear some wisdom today, hopefully from me, but also for sure from Glenda, Sophie, and Melanie. And so with no further ado, we're going to jump into our conversations. So I would invite Glenda, Melanie, and Sophie in alphabetical order by first name, just so we have a little structure for ourselves, to introduce yourself and also talk a bit about how you discerned the ministry that you currently have. How did you discern YASC if you were part of YASC? But just the bigger question of what made you want to serve God and the church? So I'll invite my dear colleague Glenda to start.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for inviting me to this conversation, and also thank you to GEM for this wonderful opportunity. I've been enjoying the different activities throughout the 3 days, as Elizabeth has said. My name is Glenda McQueen, and I was born in the border between Panama and Costa Rica, a place called Bocas del Toro. And my mother is Costa Rican, my father is Panamanian. And that that speaks a lot to who I am in terms of being born in that very small community, but that was very supportive, and just work with the children and the youth in every way possible, so that we could feel that we belong to that community. And I must say that that affirming and that support is something that I have found throughout my life growing up in church communities. And you ask us about how we discern, and I would say that in a way my communities were the ones who were able to maybe call out and identify even before I was ready, even before I was ready to affirm, but they were able to see in the midst of our sharing and living and working together. So my experience with wonderful women who were Sunday school teachers, or youth leaders, women who were involved in other forms of ministry and in leadership in the church, really played a part in my process of discernment, and just the invitations that they made to take risk and to be involved in the challenge of ministry, and just their invitation and welcome to share along with what they were doing. I would say that summarizes in a way my discernment of where I am today and what I'm doing, because of these wonderful people that just invited me to walk along with them and supported me.
Beautiful, Glenda. Thank you. Melanie?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Glenda. That really touched my heart and reminded me of my Sunday school teacher, Marietta Hagee, who she opened the world to me. And yeah, thank you for reminding me of that. I do think it starts at a young age. Speaking of, you might see a couple little ones pop in here. My kids are home with me. My husband is also an Episcopal priest, so he's doing a funeral today. But I want to fast forward a little bit to university days, which feels like a long time ago right now, but it wasn't too long ago. I was studying business, and I think there were a lot of reasons why I thought I should go to business school. But in the midst of that, was supported by a college chaplain who really encouraged us to follow our heart, follow our gut, and really discern who we were and what the future of our lives looked like because of that. So being involved in campus ministry, I think, is what really helped me discern a call to the Young Adult Service Corps. Okay, we'll fix it 1 second. And so finding out about YASCer was kind of that launch into a mission world outside of everything that I had known before. I lived in Missouri my entire life. I had traveled a little bit, but not much. The world was very small back then. So joining the Young Adult Service Corps and starting that adventure, and I think we'll probably get into that a little bit more here, it just made the world so much bigger. And my life today reflects that, with what work has been, what mission has been, and the interfaith work that I do here in Cincinnati now has grown out of that broadening of life and world. So I think that's, I don't know, I just felt drawn to that, and I felt encouraged by people in the church who said, there's more out there. Yeah. Thanks.
Great. Well, thank you, Elizabeth and Jen, for this talk, all of you today. Nice to see you, Melanie and Glenda, after a couple of weeks. I grew up in church. I would say most of the broad strokes of my childhood and adolescence were drawn to church, that through Sunday school, choir, my Episcopal high school, confirmation, it really books. And as I left home for the first time alone at 18, I experienced, I feel, a 3-layered, okay, I'll turn on my video so you can hear me better. But I experienced has been 3-layered call from God, I feel. When I was 18 Guatemala for the first time, and I felt something with it said, it's here, this is where you need to be. And at 18, I didn't have maybe all of the tools that I needed to be able at that time. I hadn't been to college yet. I hadn't really figured out what my path would look like. But I had some. And then a couple years later, when I came back, I felt a new call, which was with a new position that was offered to me by a missionary, Greg, who lives here in Guatemala, and he asked if I was interested in working with young women. And I felt another piece of the puzzle fit together. And I said, that does feel like what I'm for young women in the world, in the Anglican Communion, in where we can find another. And then the last puzzle piece came to me almost a year ago now with the YASCer program, the Young Service Corps, to form a union between my faith and my work and myself. And it brought this together. And so thank you, I've been here a year now after my college graduation last year, and I find why it is here and why it is me, and why I continue to love what I do. So thank you so much for including me, Elizabeth. I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Sophie. And I know we are all sympathetic with the internet troubles, which we can have anywhere and at any time. And listening to their stories, it reminds me of my own discernment for YASCer, which sort of came out of the blue in some ways, and also happened really, really fast. And I remember telling our former rector's wife about what I was doing and giving her the timeline, and she just looked at me and said, well, that's the Holy Spirit at work. Clearly you're supposed to be there. And I had, again, younger, and I felt still, and I still feel this way in terms of maturing into my own faith journey. And it had never occurred to me to frame it that way. But it was just a really lovely, piece of advice. And I felt like it was also, a brilliant thing to take with me, going to Tanzania, where I definitely felt the Holy Spirit at work many, many times. So as we sort of transition from the discernment piece, let's talk about what it means. What does it look like to be part of God's mission in the 21st century? We've been hearing through some brilliant keynotes and workshops about really the history from way back in the beginning to the beginnings of women missionaries with Julia Chester Emery, and having so many stories that have been shared with us. But what does it look like for each of you now in your current roles, in your role as missionaries? What does it mean to be part of God's mission?
I'll start. And when I think about that, I think it's just a willingness to serve, a willingness to be a part of people's life and be a part of institutions at a time of very rapid change. And what I find also is a time when these institutions like the church, government, families are being questioned, at least in the context where I'm around. You know, they're being questioned, and how to be faithful, how to be a Christian, how to walk with the church at this time, and in a time where society is changing so much. I think I was reflecting on the life of the apostles and the disciples after resurrection, and I think that for them, when Jesus wasn't there at that beginning, it was like, you know, a time of redefining, a time of looking at really what they were all about, and I think we're living. I see this as a time where a lot of is being redefined, and for me, it's being a part of God's mission is a willingness to be there, walking along with the people, walking along with the church and the communities as we discern what all of that is, and what does it mean in a time where I think that we are called not only to be together, but to defend the earth, to defend human life. So it's walking along with in that this time. Melanie, if you want to talk about that a little.
Yeah, thank you, Glenda. I think when you know ask what does mission look like for the 21st century, I think in some ways it has changed a lot, and you know Glenda picked up on some of that, but in some ways it really gets at the root of our Christian call, I think, to work against individualism, but holding that tension too of individual action and collective community. So when I served as a missionary in the Young Adult Service Corps, I knew that I was stepping into an environment where I was one person that was really going to stand out, and as different and a stranger to some, but that I represented something much larger. I didn't fully understand the scope of that, even till probably years later. But it reminded me that the way we interact with people on a daily basis in every environment that we walk into are made up of our personal choices with how to respect the dignity of every human being. But that our individual actions actually help move forward collective action. So the way we are in the world as missionaries in every different aspect, in every different place, close to home, far away, in small ways and large ways, it actually ends up affecting how the world and society around us is. So I try to keep that in mind as I serve as a missionary in my local context. You know, what piece can I do today that is going to make the world look more like what I think Jesus would want it to look like? So.
We'll try it again with the video, and if no. Okay, I would like to echo what Glenda was about. Willingness. I think willingness to do blank, willingness to do anything. And I think that the word missionary is something that I do a lot of reflecting about as a young white woman from a privileged background in the Christian church, coming of age in what my missionary and how that's perceived. But what I come back to in my own heart is that God does want to erase justice and inequality in our world, and he wants to see the world become a better place. And if I share that goal, love for others, then I am doing his work. And so I see mission in the 21st century as need to respond to 21st century problems. I think that to be able to in the church, maybe pushing boundaries a little bit and saying that actually is all this is, I see mission as a way to promote justice in the world on a regular basis, be that at home, at the dinner table, outside, in the street, at your job, wherever. And I'm excited to be a part of it.
Thank you so much. It's, when I wanted to invite more people to join me, it didn't really occur to me that to be an active participant myself, I would have to speak after them, which is a bit, like somebody mentioned yesterday, having to follow Dr. Meeks. It's a little bit like that for me. But I think one of the things that we talk about with our Young Adult Service Corps discernment and at our new mission orientation is that engaging in God's mission is about relationship, as you heard me say earlier, but in really the deepest and truest sense. And that means that it can be scary. It can be really vulnerable. You can get really aggravated, and you're still called to love people in the way that God loves all of us. And we also talk about how we have this broad and deep history of mission engagement as a church, but also in the broader Christian tradition. And we've learned a lot along the way, so that the way that we feel we need to engage in God's mission now is truly about being open to realizing that you are not the expert. Even if you have multiple degrees, you're always going to be able to learn something. And I do think that is something that certain people can find challenging. But to recognize too that when you are discerning a call for God's mission and looking to go to the Philippines or Guatemala or Tanzania, that the people you're working with are also discerning a call to be your hosts and to offer hospitality. And that is just as much God's mission as, working with young mothers like Sophie does, or you'll hear more. I don't want to spoil the conversations later with telling you too much about their backgrounds, but I think that God's mission in the 21st century is really something that we need to broaden. We need to push back the horizons of our understanding on what mission means and how we do it, and realize that God's mission is about being, and how we can be ourselves and be in relationship with people who can help us to become the best version of ourselves as well. So you've heard a little bit about the stories of Glenda and Melanie and Sophie and their ministries, but I'd love for them to each share a little bit more about both YASC, but certainly Glenda's role as our partnership officer for Latin America and the Caribbean. She's also helped host YASCer, so she's got multiple dimensions to her ministry. But I think that, through stories, we learn more deeply. And so how would you feel, how do those called to global ministries serve as companions in mission today? And for Melanie, has your understanding of that changed since, you came back, as did I, a number of years ago now? But I think also Sophie and I were talking not too long ago about a change in her role that has happened in part because of the pandemic and different things. So lots of time for some nuanced conversation, but I'd love to invite Glenda to start again.
Thank you. In Spanish, the word companions, compañeros, compañera, comes from kind of refers to sharing the same bread regularly. So it's been there. It is it's not something that happens at one time and it's the same bread that we're sharing. And I think mission, as you said, for me, it's about relationship. And being a companion in this time, in terms of the ministry that I do, has a lot to do, or in which I'm involved more than something I do. It's what I'm involved in, what I share with others. It can change from day to day. I used to see it as something, kind of, we could plan. I'm gonna go and be with the church in Venezuela, or with the church in the Dominican Republic, and share with them what they're doing, and hear their stories, and be able to share that in other contexts. But then there is a hurricane in Puerto Rico. So I end up in Puerto Rico, sharing with them the life that they're living without electricity, without much food. That is part of what being a compañera or a compañero is all about. And just bringing the love and the encouragement from friends and partners in other parts that are concerned about that church. So part of being a companion is being there in the different circumstances, in the different situations that arise that God is putting before us, and bearing witness along with that church in that place as they support and walk along with the people in that community for whom they're responsible in terms of mission. And so bringing the love of the Episcopal Church to that place, or to hear that story and bring it back and share it in a different context. But it's being there, even now at times when you don't understand what is going on. Even when you don't understand the decisions they're making and why they're making those decisions. But being able to reflect upon them and learn from them. For me, I would leave it there, and as a starter. Maybe I have something later on after listening to my companions in this conversation.
I'm honored to be your compañía, Glenda, and Sophie, and Elizabeth, and everyone on this call, honestly. For me, when you ask that question about relationship, it really comes down to two things I think are at the root of relationship in general, but specifically in mission, and that being trust and humility. And I'm better with stories, so I'm going to tell you about when I first came to Basao in the mountain province of the Philippines as a 22-year-old American girl who'd never lived outside the country, and only once traveled outside the country. I showed up, it was evening, about to get dark, and a couple of young women from the diocesan offices brought me up to this mountainous rural village. Elizabeth has been near there. It takes many days to travel to Basao. And everything was different. Very minimal electricity nearby, no running water, entering into a new space of life. And I was brought to the home of Mrs. Crescentia Dongalen, who was to be my host there while I lived there for at least a year. And I didn't meet her that first day or even the second day. I was kind of brought into this new space, not knowing anyone. The little area that I lived in was like attached, but like adjacent to her home where she lived, and dividing our two spaces where we lived was a metal door that was padlocked on both sides, and a bookshelf in front of it on my side with all of my kitchenware kind of things that they'd collected for me, and a hot plate right there. And I kind of had this feeling in this message of, you are a stranger, I don't know, and I don't trust. And it was, I understood that, like, that was just how it was. And it took a lot of time. It took a couple weeks of seeing each other, you know, gentle smiles and hellos, and crossing paths in the garden, and me asking little questions about washing my clothes by hand and stuff, to build that trust. And I knew that if I was going to have a relationship with her, that I would have to come at this from a deep space of humility. And long story short, after a few weeks, I went to her in the garden and said, Auntie, I want you to know that I removed the bookshelf from in front of my door. I moved it to the other sala. I hope that that's okay. And I unlocked my side of the door. So if you ever want to come in, you're more than welcome. Anytime you can come into that space. It's your home, whatever you want. And then a couple weeks later, she was able to say the same to me. And we built a beautiful, loving relationship that continued on for about a decade until she passed away just a few years ago. So, so much love that came out of that space, but without humility and trust from both of us, it wouldn't have ever happened. So.
That's moving. When I think that a lot of people throw around the word listening, but I think about it as a step further. It's one thing, and it's the other thing to actually do what they say. So doing what people recommend to you, not just listen and take it into account, but saying you do know what is best for yourself, that I trust that you know you need. I'm there as God's helper in the lives of people. If they have told me, it is up to me to help them get that. My work in Guatemala is with youth who live around this landfill in Guatemala and Central America, really. And we work in sexual education. We work with young mothers who are 14 years old and pregnant. We work in access to free contraception. And what I've had to learn over the past almost 5 years that I've been working in this ministry is that the way to make a relationship, sit down and talk, yes, but then be able to show the 15-year-old girl who needs contraception that she can trust you because you did what she asked you to do. And what that's meant for me, now a lot of people who come to the clinic for contraception, who come to the program for young moms, they don't say, I'm going to Guatemala Youth and I'm going with Sophie. Sophie told me I can come and I'm going with her. And there's that trust that where you really are a compañera, when the 15-year-old boy can ask you a question about sex and use all of the wrong language, but he knows that he asked you the question because you're going to listen to what he's asking for, not correct him and tell him what he needs. So it's something that I hold in my heart every day as I live in a culture that is not my own, working with people whose experiences are very different. And I try to keep ears in and then try to figure out whatever way I can to make that path the way that we choose to go forward. Yeah.
Yeah, I put in the chat, if you want to learn more about Sophie's ministry, they have a really great website listening to y'all reminds me of when I first got to Tanzania, and I had what I liked to call the Lion King vocabulary in Swahili. So I knew Rafiki and Simba and Hakuna Matata from the animated movie. And I learned that Rafiki meant friend and Simba meant lion. And that while Hakuna Matata does mean no worries, I was very quickly told that that was Kenyan Swahili, and that's not how we say it in Tanzania. And I think what was really striking to me was the importance of language. I think obviously listening, as my colleagues have shared, is important, but I think that communication and being able to communicate directly with people and not always through someone who happens to speak English or whatever language you're coming with is, for me, was really essential, because it meant that when I went to language school, I could actually talk with some of like the grandmothers in the villages who spoke Chigogo first and then Swahili second, and maybe knew a few words in English, but that they saw that I was trying to learn and willing to make mistakes. Let me tell you, plenty of mistakes in front of large crowds of people, but that I was trying, that there was this respect for who they were and what language they spoke. I learned a couple of greetings in Chigogo, but that was about it. But learning Swahili simplified life in many ways, certainly, but it also was something that I could do, that I had some control over, to show that I wanted to be part of the community. And then it helped some of my colleagues who didn't speak English as well to then become my teacher. And so we formed this sort of language exchange. And one of my favorite colleagues, Willie, would just sit there because he would lace up tennis shoes for the program, and we would just talk, and he had this really gentle way of correcting my grammar mistakes. But I never felt foolish. It was just, you do this. And then it was a way also to share some stories about being from the US or traveling to different places in the world that he's never been. So it really, I think the language component, when we can try to learn the language that's spoken in our context, but also just taking the time, as Sophie and Melanie and Glenda talked about, to listen and share, and then to do, and then also accept that you sometimes need the help to do. And just sort of as an aside, one of the things that we tell people at our discernment events is, this is not an opportunity for you to save the world. God has already done that. So check that one off the list. But if they write in their applications that that's what they want to do, I'm okay with it, because it gets them in the door to have a conversation. And then at the end of our discernment retreat, for the Young Adult Service Corps, if that's still the dominant thread in the narrative, then that's very clearly not the opportunity that they were looking for. But we also want to create enough space that people can do that hard work of discernment in a community that will support them, and a community that's asking the same questions. And I think that our hope is that they will take that practice with them as they go to their placements and put it into practice in different ways.
Elizabeth, I just wanted, may I just add something here?
Please.
As I heard you speaking, one of the things I always say, even when YASCers come to the region, and we're talking about what they're doing, and I always think that kind of the work is the excuse, or we can say it's the opportunity for the relationship to happen. That is where you probably start being engaging, but really what's behind it is the opportunity it gives for relationship, for you to get to know that other person, to get to trust that other person or that community, and for them to know you and trust you. And in a way, you represent maybe that world outside that that they don't know and are not, you know, do not get engaged with all the time. And so many wonderful things can happen. I heard Karen Carroll at the beginning of the session today, you know, speaking about the wonderful experience she had in the Dominican Republic. And even after you're gone, and I hear Melanie saying the same thing, but what it did in your spirit, to your soul, to your heart, is what remains, those names, those people. And even when you're not there, you continue in some kind of relationship, because that love that was built, you know, it continues, and it's not lost. So I just wanted to add that yeah, we go to do maybe, build water cisterns or you know, teach whatever, but that's just an excuse to get in the door and start getting to know and learn and love that community and that group of people. Doesn't matter, and it doesn't matter what, you know, you're working with bishops, or you're working with people in a congregation or in a small community. It's the opportunity to come together and get to know each other.
Yeah, absolutely, Glenda. I will never forget David Copley at our YASC training saying the missionary is the first one converted. And this work should change you. If you're doing it right, it should change you. And a tiny note on language, Elizabeth, that like you just really sparked this in me, is that there's a lot said by what's unsaid. And your body and the way you are and your presence, it can make a huge difference with how you arrive in a space. So you might not speak the language at all, but if you are kind and smiling and bending over to pick something up for someone, and it changes the whole dynamic. So we talk a lot like that as humans, actually.
Absolutely. So we've had this, I think, really beautiful background and big picture. And so let's dive a little bit into women specifically. That's the theme of our conference. And obviously you all, and I do, and all the other women on the call have lots of experiences in the church and mission. So I'd like to ask you this: do women bring distinctive gifts and experiences to mission service? And that can be a specific skill, but also thinking about representation and leadership. Are there unique things that women bring to this ministry?
I think so. You know, I will just say one piece that is important for me, and I think women bring a sensitivity to human needs and emotions and concerns that is very important in the work of mission, and that I think plays and makes a difference. So I'll put that one out there, and Melanie and Sophie can add some more that they see.
I must confess, I didn't pick up on the theme of the feminine until later on. And reading it just a few days ago, I thought, yes, there are things about identifying as female that make a difference for me as a missionary and for our church and for global missions. And there's a lot that doesn't. I think, you know, no matter how you identify your gender or your sexual orientation, I think that the world is more needing of more sensitive people, more compassionate people. We saw a large wave of mission endeavor early on in the church that was about violence and conquest, and we definitely need to move away from that. And, you know, that was promoted by male and female missionaries. But definitely showing up in this way in the 21st century as female identifying, I recognize that the women who came before me helped make a space for me to be able to serve as a missionary in my context. you know, early on, it was, you know, more rare for a single woman to go off to a foreign country unaccompanied, and live alone. And having that experience really changed my life, and it helped me recognize more fully that I need to, in my current and future mission endeavors, make space for other women to serve the church and the world in that way. So it's kind of a both and for me, really.
Elizabeth, I spent a lot of time thinking about this question. And I thought about how when I was in high school during my confirmation, I maybe a little rudely spoke to the priest that I was working with for my confirmation. And I said, I don't know how to feel inspired by the women in the Bible, because I feel like all the people who do cool things are men. And then the women get told that they're great because they had a baby, or because they cried, or because they helped a man. And that was part of my coming of age in the church, was thinking about, so where is my place as a woman? And what I found as I've thought more about how I see God coming through to fight against injustice is that I do know that, unfortunately, all over the world, women have a unique experience in that they do live under the patriarchy. And that is something that I can share with women all over. And that is something that I bring to my work every day. It's something that even before I spoke good Spanish, I was able to know that the young woman in front of me also had probably been catcalled on the street and been told that she wasn't as smart as her male counterparts, and that maybe the best thing for her was to get married at 15 and stay home with the baby. So that's something that I think that women bring, in that we already know that there is something to change. So as a baseline, we know that there is work to do. And of course, there's more work to do. We can get into all of intersectionality and all of the things that the church needs to do. But at a baseline, from when I was a child in Sunday school, I knew that there was something that needed to be done. And that is something that I bring as like a fire in my belly to every interaction that I have as a young woman missionary in the 21st century. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. You know, I think I thought about this question a little differently in terms of what I received as a woman missionary, young woman missionary, and definitely recognized right away the patriarchy and just also the cultural practices. But when I was in Tanzania, I remember feeling initially overwhelmed, right? Because there's so many things to learn. But the bishop's wife, Irene Mogolo, was so good at welcoming all of the missionaries, but she took a special interest in women who were coming to Tanzania from the US, the UK, Australia, or New Zealand, and really spent time to help us understand the context that we were coming into, and also the realities that women in the church faced. And I remember thinking that this was such an amazing gift that she gave to all of the women who came. And then also in her role in the diocese, she actually started a ministry called Uwaki instead of the Mothers Union. So Uwaki was for all women. You didn't have to be a mother, you didn't have to be married, but she really started it so that women knew that there was a special place for them and that recognized their gifts and their skills. And I just found that so inspiring for her to say, this is a huge part of my ministry in a diocese where, I think she was often looked as a guest because she had come to Tanzania years before from Australia and had married, a Tanzanian priest who then was elected bishop. But she had a ministry that she made her own that was still incredibly humble and welcoming to all of the women that she worked with. And so for me, that was a huge gift. And then we had some older Episcopal missionaries in the diocese, women who had had a lot more life experience than I had, and certainly had more experience in the Tanzanian church, who walked alongside, who really saw that part of their ministry was also to mentor and support the younger women and younger men who came alongside them and alongside the people in the diocese. And I know that we have run over our time a little bit, and I'm hoping that you all will give us a little more time. I know that some of the keynotes have done that. We will definitely not take extra time from Bishop Todd and Reverend Patsy, but my last sort of question for us to consider, and I think we've already done it a bit, but I'd like you, if you can, to name some of the challenges, maybe that were part of your YASC ministry, Melanie, or going through seminary, Glenda, and at the beginning, Genesis says, right, that God created all human beings in the image and likeness of God. And yet the church does not always practice what it preaches. And so can we kind of share just some stories that you have quickly, but also that I think could serve as a jumping off point for maybe some later conversations as well.
Would one of you want to start?
I could start.
Great.
So the work that I do around sexual and reproductive health is very women focused, right? Unfortunately, contraception is usually seen as a women's burden. And that's something that is, lived all around the world. But the story I want to share with you all today is a challenge for me, is having to find ways to compromise in order to do good work. And so what that has meant for me is that in a lot of conversations with, be that school principals, community leaders, men who lead, a lot of times in order for me to gain access to the group of young people, to the school classroom, to the after school program, to the football group, whoever, there are certain things where I have to sort of bite my tongue and let them call me sweetheart and in some ways degrade my professional integrity so that then I can have access and give a real comprehensive sexual education to young people. And that's where I can go and shine and be fully myself and be honest. But sometimes those initial conversations feel very hard for me, and actually harder than the daily cat calls or the danger of walking alone as a woman, all of those things. It's those conversations where I say, I actually really do know what I'm talking about. And I'm just gonna hold back and say, okay, we'll compromise on this point that you're saying to me right now so that I can take a step forward for the future generations and hope that the young men that I work with will not speak to women the way you just spoke to me in 10 years. So that's where I'll leave that.
Ooh, amen, sister. That continues in life. Unfortunately, I've had similar experiences, not just in mission, but in the church. It's a reality of life as a female missionary and leader. So thank you, Sophie, speaking some truth today. Goodness. I kind of lost track of what the initial question was, honestly. But
you can just let the Holy Spirit move you and just share what you want.
I think, at this juncture of the conversation, I would just say, like, really, I think a lot of times we make a distinction between mission work, like far off in these exotic places with different languages and culture and everything. We make that so different from the type of mission work that we encounter on an everyday basis in our local context. But the reality is it's not different at all. You still need to show up with trust and humility. You still need to be a good listener and do only for others what they ask of you, what they know already for themselves that they need in their life. And we know that we need to listen to people of all different perspectives on life and all different genders and all different ages. Because the reality is that God's mission and vision for the world is that we would collectively love and care for one another. And we can't do that if we continue to think that only a very small segment of the population knows what's best for everyone else. So I think, as we have this conversation today, my hope is that we all leave it more ready to listen and understand and show up only with love and grace for our other siblings in this crazy world, because I think the world needs a lot of good Christians, and that might look like us needing to change in order to be able to be that for the world.
Thank you, Sophie and Melanie, and for speaking so much truth to what is the reality of mission, which is still very painful in many ways, given the different context. I would just like to add some of the things I've heard have to do, because some of you touched it even before when we were speaking about what were some of the gifts, but definitely one of the challenges that I see has to do with the continuity of discrimination because of gender. Because of race and ethnicity. We cannot deny that in the mission field, that is part of the reality that we have to work around and overcome. Keep facing it every day. There is also another challenge that I see is in terms of just the whole gender thing, but depending on the regions of the world, there are areas where the ordination of women is not accepted, where women leadership in general is not accepted. And how do we serve in that type of context? How do you minister and share along and learn and grow and everything else? But those are part of the realities that still challenges us today. The other one I would say have to do with safety. I do want to bring that up. We are in a world that even post-COVID or with COVID today, the reality of violence, gender-based violence, is there in our world. And as missionaries in the field of mission, you need to be aware of that. You still need to wear your smarts about where you are, no matter, and I think believe in the community. For me, that's the key to safety. Things will happen, but in general, the community that invites, the community that welcomes will guide you well in the midst of all of this. So thank you. That's what I wanted to share.
Thank you. I know that I wish we could continue talking for hours, but we can't. I would just say that coming from Tanzania back to the United States, whereas Pearson shared in the chat just now, there are so many women leaders and just amazing women in the church who show up and who do all of the things that we talk about for their communities and in welcoming people who come. I remember being shocked when I then came back to the US and started working at the churchwide level. I think I had male colleagues for about 3 years after I had started who still thought that I was my male boss's assistant. And this still happens now if we travel together, although that hasn't happened since the pandemic, but it's still something that is assumed by some men, not all men, and even some women. it's sort of that, well, he must be in charge, and so you must be the assistant. And I think that one of the challenges that we face is, our own assumptions. And I think that we need to remind ourselves that we only see the tip of the iceberg when we meet people. And so that we need to not assume, but rather to ask a question and listen. And to do that with the love and the grace that Melanie and Sophie and Glenda have talked about. And so we're definitely all out of time, but I'd like to actually close with something from the Society of St. Margaret. So we were led into our session today with them leading us in beautiful worship, and they have a really beautiful guiding principle for their life and ministry together that once I read it, I wrote it down, and I just love it. And it's really short and sweet and to the point. Love first, love midst, love last. And ultimately, however we identify, if we can do that, we will bring the presence of God with us, and we will also step into the presence of God that others bring with them. So thank you all so much. I'm sorry, Maurice, for using all of our time, but we are, again, really, really grateful for all of you, and to Jem for the chance to be part of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. That was absolutely wonderful. Truly, don't worry about time. We're here for this. Thank you for sharing from your experiences, Sophie and Melanie and Glenda and Elizabeth. I was struck. You all lived and worked, and your ministries exist in such differing parts of the world. I'm struck by the similarities that you have in your stories. I'm reminded, we're kind of still in Eastertide, about that story of doubting Thomas after Jesus resurrected. It's like, no, I need to see your wounds. I need to see the proof of your experience. And in many ways, I feel like you're showing us the truth. And so I thank you. We had planned to break into small group discussions based on what you said, what you talked about. But I think that it would be so much more meaningful if we could just take a moment to field maybe a question or two. I know that varying perspectives, varying places around the world. So if you have a question, maybe indicate if it's for the panel or for a particular person. Yeah, again, I just want to say thank you to y'all. You're fantastic. I'm glad to see you. Any questions? Maybe go ahead and unmute yourself. We could take a moment or two or three, but not more than 3 moments for some questions. Please.
I want to just jump in and say that this whole conversation continues to remind me how large the world is, but also how small it is, and how lovely it is to see so many familiar faces on this call. And I think that's really what we're always working toward, is making this big world feel so intimate and real through our relationships. So thanks for the reminder.
Well, thank you all once again. Thank you for making the time and for being here with us. We pray for you and your ministries.